what you shared about forgiveness as you approach a role, I think could be shared, and there is value in sharing it with, I don't know, a senior executive who's contemplating a merger or a strategic acquisition, you know? And so there's a lot of overlap that's not always identified. You know, with Ronnie, we talked about the notion of friendship in a professional context. And I think that's also, you know, really important, because these are ideas that sometimes don't find a natural home in business. People think business is all about number crunching, but it's not. It's about creating a type of friendship, engaging in a type of forgiveness, of being curious and creative. And those are the character traits that I'm not going to say are more readily found in creative professionals, but I found that with the creative professionals who I've gelled with and have a personal relationship with, they're certainly both prominent, and, if I may generalize, you folks are more comfortable talking about them and have isolated them and know how to talk about them and bring them to the center. Yeah.
Well, I mean, regardless of where you are on the planet or what it is that you're doing, the raw material is ultimately humanity. And be it, you know, yeah. So, and I think that, whereas for some people, the messiness is too discomforting, and therefore distractions are sought out, or busyness is used sort of as a blanket to shield from exploration of the messiness. It is the artist's mission to dive into that and to explore it. And as opposed to, say, like an ethicist or religious leaders, where perhaps that kind of inquiry is more intellectual, this one is very experiential. And it's all about like sorting it out in real time with other messy, imperfect humans. So yeah, I think you're right. And you know, another thing that we've talked about is how the execution of art, you know, doesn't always, in fact, I would say kind of rarely aligns with the ideal of art.
Right.
But there was something you said on Tuesday, I think it was, which I just thought was so beautiful, which is that, like, purity is nowhere. Purity doesn't exist. Yeah. So how do we move forward through the impurities, through the imperfections, through, you know, the corruption and the despair and disappointment, and how do we find solutions for the world that we're in?
Yeah, I mean, messianic belief is that full hope of working for a perfect future that you know is actually never going to come. You know, and that has always motivated me. I love that. You know, I believe that, you know, the work of ethics, the work of the artist is to be messianic, which is to say, to act and hope with your full heart that you're building this perfect, ideal future, but you know it's not coming, you know, and that doesn't dissuade you from working towards the end anyway.
Yeah, this for me echoes what comes up in one of the later chapters of 15 Paths, which is the idea of the eternal recurrence of the same.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that a Nietzschean
That's
concept?
Nietzsche,
Am I remember it correctly?
Correct.
Yeah. This idea that, okay, so if the perfect world is never going to happen, or if we're sort of in this sort of cycle of the eternal recurrence of the same, which is not dissimilar from running a show for months and months and months, right? And you know, Amelia knows at the outset what the fate will be for Eve, but Eve doesn't know ever at the start of her journey what the fate will be. So as you say, you come out of the gates fighting, because today you're going to win. Today you're not going to be kicked out of paradise. Today God the Father will see reason and humanity and know love in the way that you know love and forgiveness. And you know, so the tools to have that resilience and hope, and also ingenuity with, like, how are you going to attack the same problem differently today, I think are ones that the actor has to hone
Yeah.
over the course of a lifetime. So obviously what's emerged over our conversations for me is that we share this core belief that the arts have a vital role to play in repairing our broken social or civic discourse. And the article that I mentioned earlier, and that you wrote, "Art galleries, theaters, and concert halls are the safe spaces we need to have unsafe conversations." Do you want to just maybe summarize a little bit your diagnosis there of like the state of social conversation?
Yeah, I mean, at the time that I wrote it, the world was obviously quite different, and so I'm not sure I hold by the premise anymore, which we will get to. But at the time, what I do believe is that we need to have unsafe conversations. I do believe that wholeheartedly, and I also believe that the spaces where we are used to having these uncomfortable conversations aren't safe for them anymore. So, in my primary line of work, universities, terrible places to have unsafe conversations. It doesn't happen anymore. Why is that? My honest answer, because I think my generation, people who were trained alongside me and are now, rising up the ranks in the university, are doing a really bad job of putting into practice the things that we were taught. I think my generation is failing the current generation of students in creating an academic environment like the ones that we had the privilege to be trained in. I think that there's I'm going to say this, all right? There's an ideology that I do think is toxic, and the heart of that, I think, is an illiberalism. And when I say illiberalism, I mean something, rather particular, because again, it manifests on both sides of the political spectrum. When I was growing, and again, maybe it reflects my bias as someone who comes from a religious community and whatnot, but when I was growing up, I was always around people who I strongly disagreed with. And that was okay. And there's two things going on, right? So the first thing, and it's almost like a negative feedback loop, right? Because on the one hand, that fear is toxic, and that's a failing of our civic system, of training people to be open. On the other hand, in some instances, it's not unfounded. I mean, there are some really polemical viewpoints that have been mainstreamed in the recent past. So, these two factors work together where we no longer trust the other side, and sometimes we shouldn't trust the other side, And so that's why I believe that the university and political spaces, like town halls, aren't safe spaces anymore to disagree for that reason. In general, religious spaces aren't safe for this disagreement. And so, the premise of that article is that concert halls and galleries and theaters are still the safe spaces. Now, not wholly true for a number of reasons. A is cancel culture, moves in, they become less space. B, there are many problematic individuals in power in these spaces that make them unsafe. So not necessarily true, but in theory, right? What I was arguing is like, when I go into a club to see, Sonic Youth in their heyday, play, I knew that the sounds I would be confronted with might make me uncomfortable. I know the folks that I'd see there might be weird or a little scary, and that was okay because I knew it was safe to be uncomfortable or different. When I walk into a gallery, right, I might not get the art that I'm seeing. It might make me uncomfortable because either I don't understand it, or maybe it's a worldview that is so different from my own that it makes me sit weird, and that's the goal, right? I mean, look, when I saw Paradise Lost, I was deeply uncomfortable. And a number of points, and one, that I've shared with you before was when, Lucy Peacock in her role as Satan, just by luck of the draw, where I was sitting, she did a monologue right next to me. And I was so, uncomfortable having this powerful human projecting, but that's what I was there for, right? And so theaters and artistic spaces are spaces where we know we're going to be uncomfortable. So it's a space to have these conversations because we know it's safe to be uncomfortable.
Okay, I think first maybe just to talk about, but so I think one of you're part of a sort of, I would say, rare group of people then who seeks out discomfort.
Yes.
And who is unafraid of discomfort.
Yes.
And, you know, so many times when I've discussed with my father, what's the difference between going to a play and going to, say, a sports event? You know, they're both live. In theory, the outcome is unknown. Why does one seem to engage people so like passionately? And the other one is like sort of for this very peripheral audience, this kind of niche market, and literally sometimes people, even though they've paid $100 for a ticket, will snooze through a show. And his answer is that it's because it is uncomfortable and it demands a far greater level of like participation than just sort of the adrenaline of like a sports event. And so, and that's my dad, you know, who's the father of an actor, who supports all of my work and who still feels sometimes uncomfortable in a theater and doesn't necessarily seek out that discomfort. So I think one of the sort of bigger missions perhaps of this project, and certainly in my own now practice as it evolves and as I mature, is how do we teach people to be at ease with discomfort? You know, how do we export that skill that the actor has, and that, you know, and it's a taste that you have anyway, but that I don't know is widely shared. So that's sort of one thing that I wanted to say in response to what you said, is that people who actually want to be uncomfortable are few and far between. And yet the paradox is that I think we have to be uncomfortable in order to achieve the progress and healing that we need and for which we yearn, and well, for which we ache, like literally.
I think it has to be experiential, you know, until people who don't think there's value in being uncomfortable are placed in a situation where they're made to feel uncomfortable and realize that they've grown from it. You know, that's the, and yeah, I get like the first person I think of is Ronnie. You know, I would love to bring in Ronnie to this discussion, because that's something he talks about a lot. In my forthcoming book, one of the things he said that was just so striking, his last performance that he did, Forget Me Not, he hands out 100 puppets to the audience. So it's a puppet show that the audience run the puppets, not the actors, as it were. Wow. And he said the key moment is that he hands the puppet and makes eye contact with every single audience member. And he's like, most of us are not used to that. Most of us are made really uncomfortable, but he's like, that's a transformative moment. How does he achieve what he does? Well, step one, he looks you in the eye, he hands you something, he makes you uncomfortable. And people walk out of that show saying they were changed. So we gotta get eyes here, make the conversations unsafe in this safe space. And maybe some folks will say, wow, you know, I feel better for having gone through the experience.